Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for today's podcast episode. Today I have a really special guest. His name is Dr. Rabe, and he is a professor of philosophy and process theology, and is actually a specialist in a thing called mimetic theory, which has been developed by a guy named René Girard, who some of you may have heard of, some of you may not have, and we'll get a lot more into that in the podcast episode. But I hit him up because in my last Substack article that I wrote, I mentioned one of the videos that he had created about power, and my Substack article was about power. And if you read my Substack article, you would know that he has had a pretty significant influence on how I view power and what I understand about power dynamics in relationships. And so I just kind of on a whim hit him up because he's also a Substacker. DM'd him and asked him if he'd be willing to have a conversation to just sort of unpack some of those ideas a little more and just share a little bit more of his perspective on how mimetic theory affects relationships. And so if you don't know what that is, I would recommend just doing a quick Google search of mimetic theory or René Girard, trying to prime yourself a little bit because we go a little bit deep in this podcast episode, but I really think it'll be valuable for anyone who feels stuck in relationship and wants to understand a little bit more of what typically gets in the way of relationship and what we can do about that, because he just has so much cool insight into stuff like that. So anyway, this is one of my favorite, like I said, it's one of my favorite episodes I think I've ever recorded. He just radiates love and is just such a beautiful soul, and at the same time has such a beautiful intellect and way of speaking about pretty complex things in a way that helps you understand pretty well. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. It is a beautiful day out here in Hawaii. I just recorded this episode last night, so it's still pretty fresh on my mind, and would love to have more conversations with you guys about some of the stuff that we talked about. So if you have any questions, just hit me with a DM or a comment on this, and yeah, let's have a conversation here. Hope you guys enjoy. So you're in South Africa, right?
Yes, we travel quite a lot, but we found a home base in a little town called Hermanus, and we love it. In South Africa, Hermanus, Hermanus.
Hermanus.
In the Western Cape.
Oh my gosh, that first picture on Google is just crazy. It looks so beautiful.
It's a beautiful little town on the coast, and yeah.
Wow. Are you ocean people?
We love it. We go swimming almost every day, kind of.
Really?
As our means of waking up, stumble out of bed into the marine pool.
Yeah.
Then, because the water is quite cold here, it wakes you up properly. And
that's like
we love
the original cold plunge.
Yes.
That's so cool. I think if I think about it, probably one of the connections that I made to like finding you eventually was my brother introduced me to a guy named Francois or Francois. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Francois Dutoit.
Yeah.
Francois Dutoit. Is he a friend of yours? Because I'm pretty sure I remember hearing that he lived in maybe the same town. Is it Hermanus as well?
He used to live here. They moved away probably 7 years or so ago. But yes, they are good friends. We've been friends for a few decades.
Wow. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, I essentially my story is during COVID, my brother Josh, who had been on staff at a YWAM base in Mexico, in Mazatlan, Mexico. Are you familiar with Youth with a Mission?
Yes.
Cool. So he was on staff with them, and this guy from Switzerland who had been impacted by John Crowder's mission, as well as Francois, and maybe yourself too. I don't know if you spent time with this community in Switzerland, but there's this whole like community in Switzerland that's sort of been just had this like theological revolution, and they call themselves like the finished work people. And one of these guys came from this community to this YWAM base and kind of reverse discipled my brother Josh, because my brother Josh was like supposed to be like running his DTS and like teaching him, and this guy comes and just has all this joy and is just like just a crazy dude. Like really, he was like out of his mind, but in like the best way possible.
Yes.
And he introduced my brother to Francois and gave him the mirror translation and talked about all this other stuff. And so my brother comes back, like COVID happens, and my brother comes back to Colorado where my parents were living at the time. I was kind of doing mission stuff as well in Hawaii, and I ended up coming back and living with my parents at the same time. So we're just quarantining together, and he's starting to like share all this stuff, and I've got nothing better to do but like think and figure out what I believe. And, you know, with just so much time to sit around and process things, I just went through this massive flipping upside down of my faith and of what a relationship with God meant. And I think at some point during I just bumped into so many different people and thought leaders at that time, and you ended up being one of them. And your video that I referenced in my Substack article of 2 Kinds of Power, I remember like sending to a bunch of my friends and just being like, guys, is this not like, this like blows my mind. And I think you had just a much more open-minded and curious perspective on a lot of the things that I had really wrestled with and struggled with my faith for a long time.
Yes.
And so it brought me a ton of relief, and also I think just gave me a lot of assurance that I was on the right path. I think from what I know about you and your life and your marriage, like you just seem to be a person who's really marked by love and really defined by love. And I'm the kind of guy where like when I see fruit and when I see like impact and outpouring of goodness in people's lives, I really pay attention to what they're saying.
Yes.
So anyway, long story short, that's
so good. That's so beautiful, John. Yes, we've been to the community in Switzerland, to a number of different communities. They met some amazing people, and all over the world, I think we've met people like yourself and like ourselves who suddenly have an experience of God that's larger than the tradition or the religion we grew up in, or questions that kind of takes us beyond the borders of those certainties. And that's one of the things that kind of helped me to explore much more widely, because as we met with many of them, they would ask these very sincere questions, and just the standard answer wouldn't do. We want something that's real, that actually works in life. So
yeah, I felt like there was an opportunity to like use all of my brain with my faith and not just kind of like leave some of it and like kind of have this dark corner of things I'm like not allowed to like really think about. And it was just so invigorating. Like I just remember during that season, I would spend hours, like probably 2 or 3 hours a day, just poring over scripture in the New Testament and looking at Greek and Hebrew languages and looking at all kinds of different translations of things, and just realizing how much more was in the text than I thought there was. And like especially Francois, I feel like approaches that with such this like lighthearted, just a beautiful perspective, and also just digs way deeper into manuscripts and original languages than anyone I'd really ever see. And he also just communicated it so clearly. And it was just wild. I don't, I'd been a Christian really pretty much my whole life, and I had just never had such a hunger for the scripture, because all of a sudden it was just on fire, and it made more sense and also made less sense at the same time. Like all of a sudden I was just like, wow, and there's just so many more possibilities. There's so much more that I can do with this. So what
were some of the fundamental ideas that were kind of flipped upside down for you?
Before I get into this too, I just want to know from you, what is your timeline like on this conversation? Because I want to make sure to honor your time.
Probably for the next hour, I'm fine.
Okay, great.
So maybe
we'll cut off. I'll try to cut off around 9 a.m. your time then. The biggest things, I think the first and biggest domino to fall was the idea of separation, and just how I had never really considered how deep into my understanding of God this concept of separation was, and how prevalent it was in like a lot of my thoughts and prayers and just posture with God. Yes. And I just remember, I think that it almost felt like a change in the chemistry of my brain. Like it was so it so deeply impacted me, this idea that God is not above and I'm below, and I need to get closer to God. And even like what Jesus accomplished on the cross was this like getting me closer. But there's this idea that like from the beginning, like there's always been this union and there's always been this relationship, and we've been caught up in it. And I think just so deeply that sank into me. And when I would go to pray, it just the posture of praying to a God that I'm in union with, and in this embrace that never ends, was so different. And yeah, it just caught a lot of time out of praying, because I feel like I used to spend so much time just trying to get God to like listen to me and to come, be with me first. Spent so much energy doing that, and it was such a relief to be like, wow, there's nothing I can do to make distance here. Yes. I think Colossians 1 was really the chapter that, like, yeah. Actually, let me pull it out. It's kind of funny.
Okay.
I just read it every day for so long and just studied so deeply into all of it. And I think that chapter, there's one verse specifically about how all things were created through him, speaking about Christ, and in him all things hold together. And so like this is my Colossians 1. It's like you can't even read it anymore. Yes. It's just like so much stuff, and just such an adventure that I went on. It's a profound
book. It's such a expansive vision of what we mean when we speak about Christ. As the one in whom all things consist. It's no longer just this historic figure, but Jesus becomes kind of the embodiment of what has always been real, and what is the nature of reality today, and that is a world saturated in the presence and the consciousness of God. Yeah,
and I could rant on it for a long time, but that had a really profound impact on me. And I think another thing I really remember hitting on hard was just there's so much language in the New Testament around, depending on how you translate it, it's like either what happens as a result of our faith in Jesus Christ versus the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. Yes. And I remember bumping into one of your videos about that and just being like completely mind blown, and then doing my own study and looking at all the original languages and all the manuscripts, and just being like, wow, it's really in there.
Yes.
Like, I can't believe that it says this, or can say this. It was a really fun season, and still is, to be honest. But I will say, like, one of the more difficult parts of that whole reworking that I had was, other than my brother, finding people to like really deeply resonate with on it. Because what I found was I was so energized about it for a long time that I almost overdid it, and in a lot of relationships loved talking about it so much that it just became kind of noise. And I think probably did some damage or alienated some friends, just because it was such a different framework for everything that most people, it's like when people encounter it, it either really disturbs them and really frustrates them because it like is heresy, or like seems like heresy, something seems wrong with it, or they like completely, like they have the same exact experience and just like completely unravel. But more often than not, I was finding that a lot of friends that I cared really deeply about were feeling alienated from me because of it, which makes sense. It's theology and our beliefs about the Bible, especially when they're ingrained in us from a young age, are there's a nerve you can hit there. And so there were definitely some people I connected really deeply with, my brother namely being like one of the big ones. But it's been 5 years now since that happened, and I moved to Hawaii since then. Like, I was living in Colorado back then, and I will say, like, I do struggle to find people to really connect with on this level about this kind of
Yeah.
stuff, because when I go to most churches out here, if I'm going to really be honest and like talk about how I feel about things or share, like especially here, they're very traditional, very kind of conservative,
Yes.
do things the way they've been doing them for forever. And so I kind of become a problem if I'm going to be like really just myself. And so I've found ways to continue building relationships with people around this stuff, but I have found it really difficult to,
that is,
like I've been telling my wife lately. Go ahead.
No, that's such a common experience. I mean, we spend time with communities all over the world, and that is one of the things that all of them have in common, is this discovery of something that sets them on fire and brings life in such a new way. How to fit that wine into old wineskins. It is the question that
Yes.
How do we introduce the beauty of something novel and new and still have enough familiarity in it to actually pull people along? But how we encourage people everywhere is just like yourself. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are experiencing what you experience. And in different places in the world, they're starting to form communities, starting to find a new way of expressing this life. So I think it's an unavoidable part of this journey.
Yeah. Well, that is really encouraging to hear. And it's something, there have been gears turning in my head for a while on this, because sort of one of the reasons I have my Substack called Friendology, and I love writing about friendship, is I'm pretty troubled by how the world is moving in terms of isolation and just people being disconnected. And when I look around at my friend groups here and just at people, just anecdotally in my life, the people that I bump into, it just feels like I've noticed a significant shift in the last 5 years towards loneliness and isolation. And I think a lot of it has to do with smartphone addiction and people just having a hard time getting off of technology and all of that. And I felt it myself, a struggle to like sort of build community. And especially like now I'm turning 30 in about a month, moving into this new stage of life and figuring out like how to build new relationships. I just see a huge need there. And it's really encouraging to hear about this, like just these communities that are finding each other like this around the world, because it's just been in my head for a while of like, what's going to be next for mankind and especially for Christians in the church. Like it feels like you said, old wineskins. It feels like there's a lot of old wineskins, and the old wineskins just trouble me. And I've just had this stirring in me for a long time of like, I just want to, if I can, be a part of whatever's next, because I think something beautiful can come of this.
Absolutely.
But I don't know how it's going to work or what my role is there.
Yeah. That's the nature of creativity. There's always tension when something new and beautiful is being created. There's no creativity without that tension. I think the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead kind of spoke so beautifully about the advance of civilizations, that basically our choices are advancement into something more beautiful or decadence. There's no middle ground where we can just maintain a stable kind of civilization or community. It either innovates, brings about novelty and something more beautiful, or it becomes less and less relevant and dies. And so I think in a very real way, there's, despite all the discord and chaos that we see, those are necessary ingredients for advancement. So harmony is not just order. Harmony is a balance between order and disorder. It is that tension that actually fuels creativity. So yes, although we can, in this chaos, we can see a lot of things that are disturbing, it's also, there are creative possibilities available for creating new forms of community, new forms of relationship that's better than the old. Let's compare it to the old kind of isolated faith community where you are friends with the people in your church and you're not disturbed by any other opinions or thoughts outside of that little community.
Yeah.
We simply don't live in a world that is that isolated anymore. People are more connected, they travel more, communities are more diverse, and people are finding out that, wow, even people of completely different faiths or religions or traditions have something valuable and beautiful within that faith and tradition. So how do we acknowledge what is good and beautiful even in other faiths and still remain faithful to our own tradition?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the tension that's moving it forward.
Yeah. You're reminding me too, like I saw you did a really cool interview. I didn't listen to all of it, but with a Buddhist monk recently.
Oh, yes.
I think you posted that on Substack, and I thought that was really beautiful. And I connect with it too, and just what you said about starting to see beauty and see truth in people that are unlike us, where you asked earlier, like what some of the biggest implications of my reworking of faith was. And I think part of the no separation thing was starting to have this shift to seeing Christ everywhere and seeing Christ not just in people who believed in Christ the way I did, but in everyone. And that shift has really challenged me. And I think also just been I feel like I've learned so much more because of it. I just have been open to truth from so many other sources. Yeah. And I think even deeper, like one of the challenges that's like even within that is I was pretty jaded towards the church just in general because it felt so close-minded, and I had so much just angst against the thing that I was brought up in for so long. And I think it's been a cool challenge, and I've just felt God just inspiring this in me to see Christ in the place that I first saw him as well, and like continue valuing those people just as I do everyone else now. Because I think it's really easy to switch back into just who are the good people, who are the bad people, who's my tribe, who are the people that truth comes from kind of mode. And it's just funny how fast I think like ego goes to that. And
That's so good. It's so good. Yeah.
Andre, one thing that I would love to know just from your own personal life is you've been really marked by the teachings of René Girard, and you have done a lot of work on him and written a lot about him. And I think was introduced to mimetic theory from you. And something that I wanted to ask you in this conversation is, like, if you look back over the course of your life, I assume you bumped into him like a pretty long time ago. And he has so much of a theory and a way of thinking that impacts how we see relationships and how we see conflict and what comes between and creates barriers with people or not. I'm curious how you've seen those ideas, since they really took root in you, affect how you go about building friendships in your life, and how that has affected your own sense of community and the people that you've really walked with for decades.
Yes. Brilliant question. Love it. And it also gives me an opportunity to speak about his thoughts, mimetic theory, within a very specific context, because it's such a broad idea that you can speak about everything from the origins of religion to how we became human. But ultimately, I think the most impactful and relevant part of his work is exactly that. How does it affect your relationships? And I would say that the fundamental insight that has taken me many years to find a way of articulating it, and I had to draw from other sources as well to come to a way of saying it, that Girard himself might not say this explicitly, but this is the idea that has crystallized for me, is that relationships are not simply things that happens between us. It's not something that happens between me and my wife or me and my kids. Rather, relationships are what I'm made of. So there's not this old idea that I maybe grew up with, is here I am, here's my wife, and we're going to decide to have some kind of relationship in between us. But I can decide to what extent that relationship affects me and to what extent it affects her. And with some of my other relationships with other people that might not be that important, I can cut it off or choose to minimize it. And so I still had this idea that I am a something separate from the relationships that I'm in. And that idea has been turned upside down to realize, no, I am the distillations of all the relationships that have formed me. That outside of these relationships, I would not exist. That there is no I beyond these relational movements. Maybe a simpler example would be, you can, we live in an area where there are some very good winemakers. And if I look at the bottle of wine and I apply the old kind of Platonic idea of these heavenly forms and then there's these physical manifestations, that view of reality would say that this bottle of wine is just a manifestation of this heavenly form, and compared to that heavenly form, it's actually just a shadow, and it doesn't give much reference to the relationships that produce that wine. And I think in Christianity we've adopted that view that you are John, I am Andre, and in heaven God had this blueprint idea of who I am, created it, and my only contribution is to discover who God made me to be. Now that completely changed for me. And let me go back to the metaphor of wine. That wine is a distillation of all the relationships, the relationship between the vine and the soil, between the vine and the weather, the sun, the bacteria in the soil. All of those relationships produced a grape, and then the relationship with the farmer who one day decides, today we're harvesting, and this is the process that we're going to put these grapes through to eventually produce this wine. And the substance of that wine is basically the embodiment of that whole story and all of those relationships that is now embodied within that wine. And so that's one thing that fundamentally changed for me, is I no longer consider myself as something or someone that was created by God in the past, and I just need to find out who I am. Rather, I realize that I am in the process of being created. And God and every other person, every relationship I am in, is part of that co-creative process. And when I first realized that, that was quite a scary thought, because I didn't want anybody to just be part of creating me. That kind of ego-centric view was protective of what I thought I was. But I've come to a place where I really appreciate the way in which others affect me and I affect them. And so Girard, he kind of delved into the fact that especially the idea of desire is very important in the way he describes relationships, that desire is not simply something that emerges from me. I think very often if people think, where do my desires come from? They just say, oh, from within me. Girard gave this very clear description that desires do not emerge from the self, but rather the self is formed by desires, and these desires are communicated by the relationships we are in. And so he very clearly focused on the conflictual side, how that can go wrong and cause conflict, and he was excellent in describing the phenomena of violence throughout human history and how that is connected to desire. And he acknowledged that there's this creative side of mimetic relationships. And quickly, mimetic, it's just a word, our more common word in English would be mimic or imitate, but he chose not to use the word imitate because it had too much of a conscious connotation to it. And he wanted to emphasize that this is something that happens unconsciously. So he just chose a different word within academia to kind of emphasize that this is an unconscious process by which we reflect the interiority and the desires of other people. So how did it transform my relationship? Number one, I've started valuing and acknowledging the creative influence that it has upon who I am and the creative influence that I have upon others. Secondly, it helped me understand conflict in a very different way. So I'm just going to skip to the conclusion, which is kind of you missing the whole theory that brought me there, but we don't have a room for the whole theory. But the conclusion is this, that when I find myself in conflict with somebody, where it's very easy to say, why are you being such an idiot? Why are you being so selfish? It's so easy to project our chaos and our onto others. But now I can ask a different question, and that is, what do I desire that I perceive this person as an obstacle to the fulfillment of that desire? And so if this has got beautiful correlations with scripture as well. In the book of James, he says, why is there conflict amongst you? Why is there war? It's because you desire and your desires are not fulfilled. So he kind of also brings back the phenomena of conflict to this unfulfilled desire. And so even in relationship with those closest to me, when there's conflict, I can sit back and just instead of just looking outside of myself for the reasons for this conflict, I can consider what is it that I desire, that I perceive this person as blocking or being an obstacle to it. So he gave me lots of insight into understanding conflict. But him, together with many others, have helped me understand also the creative movements of relationships. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I would love to get like a more concrete example too of what you were just talking about with trying to understand the desire that the person has become an obstacle to. Is there like a story you could share that sort of paints that picture?
Let me give a simple example that everyone will recognize as to where it begins. And there's lots of studies that's done on child development to kind of bring out these examples. But imagine you've got a toddler in a room full of toys. And this toddler is not really giving any particular attention to any particular toys, just kind of floating around, deciding what he wants. If you introduce a second toddler into the room, he or she will notice the other toddler first, and the second thing, let's say, she will notice is the toy closest to the other toddler, and they will head over to that toy. And in that moment, the first toddler will realize that's the toy I've been looking for, and a war breaks out. And that's a simple example of we don't know what we desire. And so we look at others to tell us what is desirable. And then we reach for the same object, and very often if two hands reach for the same object, conflict erupts. Now, it doesn't have to be conflictual always. So in my book, Processing Mimetic Reality, I give examples of how we can understand desire in a creative, positive way as well. So let me give that example. If we have maybe 5 kids in a sand pit, and we come to them and say, hey, instead of this sand pit, who of you would like to go to the beach? And all of them, yeah, we want to go to the beach. A desire was created simply by offering them a different possibility, a possibility of more sand, more freedom. There was no sense of comparison to others or existential lack. Desire emerges in that space between what is and what could be. I think that is the most basic definition of it. Now imagine that we choose 2 out of the 5 kids, and we say the 2 of you can come to the beach, the rest of you have got to stay here. Suddenly there's an opportunity for desire to be twisted in a whole different way, because now they don't just compare one situation with another, a present actuality with a future possibility, but they compare who I am with who that person is. That person has got a fulfilled desire that I don't have. They have a fullness that I lack. And a lot of Girard's work was focused in on that area where desire emerges in the sense of lack of being. And because we don't know what we want, we look at others for what we want. That's why within advertising, they don't just advertise the latest car. What they do is they put a model next to that car that represents everything they think you want to be. It's either this successful, handsome, great guy or this very good-looking lady. It's never just about the car. It's about the person that has it all together, that has a sense of fullness. And because they want the car, you want it.
Right.
And so it works whether it's in advertising or anything like that. Is they've tapped into this idea that a very strong motivation in people unconsciously is the sense of personal lack that makes it easy for us to look at others and recognize a fullness that we think we lack. And that becomes the basis of a twisted form of desire.
Yep.
Is that helpful as an example?
It's super helpful. Yeah. A lot of my gears are turning right now in just applying this to friendship in the sense of like something I've noticed with a lot of people. And one of the reasons I think a lot of people, especially these days, don't have long-lasting, deep friendships in their lives is they hit a barrier with people where there is something that happens between the two of them that bothers one of them and they have conflict. You know, either someone mistreats or someone feels they've been mistreated, or there's a misunderstanding, or they both want something and only one of them can have it. And there's these power struggles or whatever, and people get hurt in all kinds of different ways. But I've just noticed that very, very, very few friendships make it past that moment to be able to have like a rupture and repair afterwards, and for them to come and say, you know, hey, I've been hurt this way, and for them to go through the uncomfortable conversations of figuring out how to move forward together. But what I found, at least for me, is that I have a handful of friends that I've been through that cycle with a few times, and really just intimacy and depth and beauty is on the other side of those conversations. But I think it's really hard. And even now for newer relationships for me, I still feel that fear of addressing when there's conflict. And I'm curious, just with like the tool belt that Girard gives you of understanding how conflict can arise and how it can cause, issues essentially between people in relationship. Like what would you say, like, to someone who was in the middle of a dispute, sort of from a Girardian standpoint of like how to understand it better and how to maybe see it more clearly to deal with it in a way that might be healthier?
Yeah. I think one of the things that he immediately does is gives us an insight into how conflict escalates. So within that conflict, trying to find the thing we desire that we perceive the other person as either having or preventing me from having. I think that insight is the first thing that will help understand the whole situation. Secondly, it's an understanding that we reflect the interiority of others, and so we don't fight because we are different. That's very often the idea, is we're just incompatible. You do this, I do this. We fight because we're so different. But rather we fight because we are the same. And especially as conflict escalates, to give a totally different example, but even in war, as conflict escalates, we bomb you, you bomb us, we bomb you, eventually we just become a mirror reflection of the hostility of the other. And there's really no difference between, we've forgotten what we fight about. All we want to do is annihilate the other who wants to annihilate me. And so that is at the height of conflict like that. But in personal situations, I would say it brings about a much more awareness of my own reaction in this situation, which is very helpful. If that's the only thing Girard could do for us, that would be super helpful, because I'm no longer just focusing on what you do and what you feel, but I'm asking, why do I feel offended? Why do I feel hurt? And that, to explain what one can go through in that process by itself is an enormous journey, but it really brings insight into, what do I feel needs protection? Why am I so offended by this? And to then, if we lose those boundaries, if we allow ourselves to become vulnerable and to say, actually, this friendship is more valuable than these psychological, artificial barriers that I've placed around me. In fact, there's things in me that doesn't really need protection. Actually, if it kind of dissolves, it would be better. Let me expose myself to be contradicted. Let me expose myself to that and see where that leads. And vulnerability is such a key component in relationships. That's where intimacy happens. So those are, without going into many of the other aspects in terms of mimetic theory, I would say it's this insight into my own interiority, an identification of what it is that we desire, a realization that we can easily come to mirror one another. And if you find yourself in a place of conflict, then stop mirroring the conflict of the other. Move your focus somewhere else. Have a broader set of relationships that can keep you from becoming obsessed with just this one relationship.
Yep. So in a sense, it sounds like you're saying knowing yourself and having a sense of introspection and being able to, like, I don't know if you can ever cut off that reflection, because it is, like you said, it's like so subconscious. It's such a base level way of operating for us, but at least becoming aware that there is more going on than just what the other person is doing, and that there's something going on inside of you at the same time.
Yes. And to throw this in there, when I start working, I worked on extending Girard's theory to look at the creative and positive aspects of mimetic desire as well. And one of the things that I could identify in that one can do, for instance, Girard would say, two people reaching for the same object often causes conflict. The one reflecting the desire of the others. I would say that there's a way of looking at another person in which I can reflect them that is non-conflictual. So, for instance, that's why we have saints. We've got people who exemplified qualities that are worthy of imitation. So this person showed a kind of kindness or courage or a quality that we can emulate without causing conflict. And part of that kind of imitation is to recognize that the beauty and the value that I recognize in you is something that is not just held within you, but it is a divine possibility. It's a way in which God is actually reaching out to me saying, this kindness, this courage is available to you too. And that helps me look at my friendships and relationships in a whole different way, that this is a way in which God is opening divine possibilities for my own becoming. And that kind of reflective relationship doesn't lead to conflict. I think it's Paul that says, let's outdo one another in kindness. It's like, I can imitate your kindness and do it even more, and it won't cause conflict. Very often conflictual situations is about, happens within that sense of existential lack where I am not happy within myself. And I'm seeking a sense of fullness that I think you withhold from me. So maybe another insight on that is learning how to be content with where you are, what you have, and that my excitement and my desire for the future is not necessarily because I'm just totally unhappy with where I'm at, but it's rather the possibilities of being and value that draws me into a future that's larger than where I'm at right now.
Yeah. What I'm almost visualizing as you're talking, there's sort of like the downward Girardian spiral of chaos and conflict and hatred and comparison. And it sounds like what you have done with your work and also your fascination here is that there's an upward spiral that is possible as well.
Absolutely.
That there's a spiral into love and curiosity and openness, and all still in a reflective way. But something I remember when I first was going through a lot of my sort of, whatever you want to call it, theological revolution or just spiritual upheaval in 2020 was I came to realize that a lot of the way that I thought about love was this very monolithic thing that someone generated from themselves and was ultimately about them. So like God's love for me was really because God is perfect love, and it's really his love for me was about him. And even the way that I would talk about people when they were loving people, as I would say, like, oh, they just have loved so well. Like they're so good at loving. It's like this skill that someone hones that is really about them. It's about their skill, the love that really comes from them. And I think there was this moment of aha that I came to, of realizing that love is ultimately about the beloved just as much as it is about the lover, and that there really is no one without the other. And just fell in love with this idea that God's love was about me, that if it wasn't me, it wouldn't be God's love for me. Like it was truly specific to me, and pulled out. Like there was this visual I had of like that love pulls, it doesn't push. And when I love someone, when I encounter a friend that I like want to spend time with, it's not because I'm just I'm a loving person, but I'm helpless to it. Like they pull the love out of me. It has nothing to do with me almost. And you're just reminding me of that. And just how much I just love that visual of how relationships form between people.
Yeah, love it. The fulfillment of love, although it can be self-giving and in a sense selfless, I think its ultimate fulfillment is a mutual movement in which there's a reciprocal and reflective relationship that benefits both parties. Love can be one-sided, but I think its ultimate destiny is to be that flow. Yeah.
Right. And I think it makes me think of what you were talking about earlier with how like you just realize that you are not you without the relationships, and that you contain a multitude of relationships, and you are being created through that with people. And I think that's really lovely. One other thing I had been wanting to bring up with you that I think is just a consistent factor that I see impacting people's relationships, and also is just a consistent language that I hear these days, is there's this concept that we need to be really particular about the people that we surround ourselves with. Like I have a lot of friends who will say like, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And it kind of a little bit hits on that idea you shared of like that you were being co-created and by the people that you're spending your time with, and that those relationships are really creating you. And something that's just sort of struck me there is I see culture drifting towards this style of friendship that is really that really like susses people out to see if they really match up with the ideal that they want for their life, and is fairly dismissive of people that don't really fit that mold necessarily. And I think something that has been, to me, a really sacred and beautiful central part of my faith growing up is just that like we love everyone, and that often the love that you might have for someone that can give you nothing in return. Like I think of when Jesus talks about like, why would God like be pleased by you lending money to someone who can pay you back, or giving to someone who you know will return it to you? And I've just been processing this where like I'm starting to realize that there's a loss of this idea that there's value in loving people that seemingly have nothing to give us in return.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious how you would respond to that, just even from a Girardian perspective.
That's so beautiful, because I think it's very true in the first place that you are created by relationships, and that those closest to you have a larger effect and influence upon you. But the unfortunate consequence of that is, as you've said, people imagine that they know which relationships are most valuable and which not. So if you have a perverted idea of what is valuable, then you might say, oh, I'm going to surround myself with all these successful and this and that kind of people because they are obviously valuable.
Right.
And that is missing God in his most beautiful disguise. I think that is a phrase that was used by Mother Teresa when somebody asked her, why do you spend your time with all these, the waste of humanity, people who've got nothing to offer, nothing to give? And she said, I don't want to miss God in his most beautiful disguise.
Such a cool
so
line.
there's value in the most unusual places. Jesus himself telling the parable of, I was hungry and you fed me. I was in prison. You came to visit me. When did we do it? What you do to the least of these, you do to me. And so I think we can be wise in recognizing relationships that are destructive, that are not where they should be at this moment, and it's wise for us to minimize those. But that is not the same as cutting ourselves off from those who are just categorized according to social categories as having nothing to give. The least of these have got a lot to give. And, Marianne and myself, we involved in some work locally in disadvantaged communities. And people often want us to give examples of what, and there's beautiful stories of how we've helped certain people achieve things. But by far, the greatest effect is how we've been enriched by their stories and their friendships, and people who are not within our social circles normally. There's a huge treasure to be found there.
Yeah. That's so good. And yeah, that's been sort of my intuition for a while too. Yes. It's like, I think we're really bad at predicting who we're gonna be really benefited by being in relationship with, or at least I am historically. And it's fun to be surprised by that.
It is.
Yeah, Andre, we're kind of at time here, and I want to respect your time. But I wanted to ask one last question just before we go. I'm starting to realize like this newsletter and this Substack that I'm going to be posting to, it'll be on my YouTube as well, but this Substack has really started to find its voice in just speaking into friendship as a whole. And I think a lot of the people, especially that have been more lately finding it and subscribing to it, are coming to the Substack just hungry for friendship and relationship and are just wanting to be students of it, just as I am. Mm-hmm. So I guess just as like a closing thought from you, like for someone like that who maybe feels isolated or feels stuck and not knowing how to move forward in just an increasingly lonely world, like what benediction would you give or encouragement would you give mm-hmm. to someone who finds themselves in that place?
I would just remind you that your very existence, the fact that you are here, is because you have a unique story that brought you about. This whole universe has found a unique unity within your being, who you are. So I think that's the essence of the gospel message, is that the word becomes flesh, that the ideas in the mind of God finds actual material value. And you are one of those examples of God. God's mind, the possibilities in his mind finding an actual embodied form. And so when you start off by realizing that value, and it's not the value that you achieve through any, endeavors that you can measure according to what success is. It's just your very existence is this beautiful gift of God pouring himself out into this world. Then whatever obstacles you've had in saying I might not be a good friend or people won't like me or whatever, those become absolutely irrelevant. The same God who finds existence in you finds existence in others. And one of the things that have led us to communities all over the world, different languages, different cultures, there's so many differences, yet we are convinced that there's something in them that resonates with us. And we go and we call that, we connect with that. The same God who's finding a temple in me has found a temple in you, and there's a basis for connection. And so go with that expectation that God is waiting in every encounter to be recognized and to be loved, and you are part of his strategy to do that. Yeah.
Lovely, dude. Yeah, I take that to heart. Seriously, those are seriously some good words, and I'm excited to kind of return to this and just sit on that for a while. Yeah. Andre, thank you so much just for sharing all of this and just kind of bringing yourself here. It's been a real gift to me, and I hope anyone who's listening has enjoyed it as much as I had. So
thank you, John.
We can wrap it up here, but appreciate you a bunch, man.